A single mother cleaned bathrooms for money until she met a millionaire CEO. Facing the millionaire, her life takes an unexpected turn. To support her child, she studied abandoned books. Watch this incredible story of overcoming obstacles until the end. Jessie Parker's hands were raw from scrubbing toilets all day. As she wiped down another marble sink in the executive bathroom of Sinclair Enterprises, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under tired eyes, hair hastily pulled back, and a determined set to her jaw that refused to surrender. At 32, this wasn't where she had imagined herself, but then again, life had a way of derailing even the best-laid plans. Almost done for tonight, she whispered to herself, glancing at her watch. It was nearly 11 p.m., and her 8-year-old son, Tyler, would be waiting at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment downstairs. The kind, elderly neighbor had become Jessie's lifeline since she'd taken this night-cleaning job at Boston's most prestigious financial firm. The janitorial company paid just enough to keep their small apartment in Dorchester and put food on the table, but not enough for proper childcare. Every cent she saved went into a jar labeled Tyler's Future, a promise she intended to keep no matter what. As she moved through the empty office corridors with her cleaning cart, the contrast between her reality and the world around her couldn't be more stark. Designer furniture, million-dollar views of the Boston skyline, and champagne still chilling in crystal buckets from earlier celebrations of another successful quarter. Jessie paused by a conference room where presentations remained pulled up on multiple screens. Financial projections, acquisition plans, market analyses, all Greek to most people but not to her. Night after night, week after week, Jessie had been absorbing every bit of information she could. When executives forgot to log out of computers, she'd read their emails and reports. When they left documents on tables, she'd study them while eating her sandwich during breaks. What had started as mere curiosity had become an education more valuable than any degree. 3 years of this routine had taught her more about corporate America than most business school graduates ever learned. "Excuse me? You're still here?" Jessie jumped, nearly knocking over her cart. A middle-aged executive in an expensive suit stood in the doorway, clearly working late. "Sorry, Mr. Whitman, just finishing up." She kept her eyes down, playing the role everyone expected of her, invisible, servile, grateful. "No problem. Carry on." He barely looked at her as he grabbed a folder and walked away, already on his phone discussing some urgent deal. That was how it always went. They looked through her, not at her. Sometimes she wondered if she could stand in the middle of the boardroom screaming and they'd still walk around her without notice. But tonight was different. As she emptied the trash in an executive office, a book caught her eye. Advanced Mandarin for Business. She flipped through it, recognizing characters she had been teaching herself through library books and free online courses. Her mother had been half Chinese, but had never taught Jessie the language. After her mother's passing, learning Mandarin had become Jessie's way of connecting to that lost heritage. On impulse, she slipped the book into her bag. Mr. Reynolds, the marketing VP, whose office this was, had dozens of books he never touched. She'd return it once she'd gone through it. An hour later, Jessie was finally home, tiptoeing into their small apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez had fallen asleep on the couch, the TV still playing a telenovela at low volume. "Mrs. R," Jessie whispered, gently touching the woman's shoulder. "I'm home." The elderly woman startled awake. "Oh, Jessie, dear, Tyler was such a good boy, did all his homework and went to bed without any fuss." "Thank you again," Jessie said, pressing a $20 bill into the woman's hand despite her protests. "Please take it, you're a godsend." After seeing Mrs. Rodriguez out, Jessie peeked into Tyler's room. Her heart swelled at the sight of her son sleeping peacefully, surrounded by space posters and science books from the library. He was brilliant, there was no doubt about that. His teachers all said he was gifted, especially in mathematics and science. He deserved better than what she could give him now, but she was determined to change that. Jessie showered quickly, washing away the smell of cleaning products before sitting cross-legged on her bed with the borrowed Mandarin book. For 2 hours she practiced pronunciations, wrote characters and memorized business phrases until her eyes burned from exhaustion. Her phone alarm was set for 6 a.m., just enough time to get Tyler ready for school before heading to her job as a cashier at a local cafe. Between both jobs, she managed about 4 hours of sleep most nights, but it was worth it. Someday, all this sacrifice would pay off. The next morning, as she served customers their morning coffee with a smile that hid her fatigue, Jessie overheard two men in suits discussing Sinclair Enterprises. "They're desperate to find a temporary interpreter for the Shanghai merger," one said. "Their regular guy had some family emergency and they need someone fluent in Mandarin for next week's meetings." "Good luck with that." "On short notice," his companion replied. "Those specialized business interpreters charge a fortune." Jessie's heart raced as she pretended to wipe down nearby tables. This was it, the opportunity she had been unknowingly preparing for. Could she really do it? Her Mandarin wasn't perfect, but she understood enough to get by, especially in business contexts she'd been studying for years. That night, after her cleaning shift, she did something that terrified her. She drafted an email to Sinclair's HR department, applying for the temporary interpreter position. She emphasized her self-taught language skills, her familiarity with business terminology, and her availability. What she lacked in credentials, she made up for in determination. Before she could lose her nerve, she hit send. 3 days passed with no response. Jessie had almost given up hope when her phone rang with an unknown number while she was on her lunch break at the cafe. "Hello, is this Jessica Parker? This is Linda from Sinclair Enterprises Human Resources. We received your unusual application for the interpreter position." Jessie's throat went dry. "Yes, that's me." "Well, Ms. Parker, I must say your application raised some eyebrows. You have no formal qualifications or experience as an interpreter." "I understand that, but however," Linda continued, "we're in a difficult position. Our meetings with the Shanghai team begin Monday, and we haven't found anyone suitable. On such short notice, would you be available for a quick assessment tomorrow morning?" Jessie nearly dropped her phone. "Yes, absolutely, yes. 9 a.m. 31st floor. Ask for me at reception." After hanging up, Jessie leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She had one shot, one chance to change everything. That night, she studied harder than ever, practicing every business term she could find, rehearsing introductions and formalities until Tyler finally convinced her to get some sleep. "Mom, you know everything already," he said, his small hand patting her shoulder. "You're the smartest person I know." The next morning, Jessie stood in front of Sinclair Enterprises, wearing the only professional outfit she owned, a navy blue dress from a thrift store and a second-hand blazer that was slightly too big. She had spent an hour straightening her naturally curly hair and applying minimal makeup, trying to look the part of someone who belonged in this world. As she rode the elevator to the 31st floor, she repeated a mantra in her head. "I deserve to be here. I can do this." The doors opened to reveal a world she had only seen after hours, bustling, dynamic, full of purpose and power. "Jessica Parker for Linda in HR," she told the receptionist, trying to keep her voice steady. "She's expecting you. Please take a seat." Jessie sat rigidly on the edge of a leather chair, watching people come and go, all of them exuding a confidence she was desperately trying to fake. After 15 minutes, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair approached. "Ms. Parker, I'm Linda. Follow me, please." The assessment room contained 3 people. Linda, a stern-looking HR director named Mr. Phillips, and a junior executive who would role-play various business scenarios. For the next hour, they put her through the paces, testing her Mandarin, her understanding of business concepts, her ability to translate technical terms. Jessie's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. This was her chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. When they finally finished, Mr. Phillips removed his glasses and looked at her with narrowed eyes. "Your Mandarin is adequate. Not perfect, but workable. Where did you say you studied?" "I'm self-taught, sir." His eyebrows shot up. "Self-taught? Impossible." "I assure you it's the truth. I've been studying for years on my own." The 3 evaluators exchanged looks, clearly skeptical, Linda cleared her throat. "Well, Ms. Parker, we appreciate you coming in. We'll be in touch." As Jessie left the building, uncertainty churned in her stomach. Had she done enough? Was her adequate Mandarin going to cost her this opportunity? 3 hours later, as she was serving coffee to the afternoon rush, her phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Linda from Sinclair. The position is yours if you want it. Temporary contract, 6 weeks, starting Monday. 35 hours, reply by 5 p.m. to confirm." Jessie's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped a customer's latte. $35 an hour was more than she made in half a day of cleaning. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a lifeline. "Yes," she texted back. "Immediately. I accept. Thank you for this chance." That weekend was a blur of preparation. She arranged with Mrs. Rodriguez to watch Tyler after school. She gave notice at the cafe, though she kept her cleaning job, switching to weekend shifts only. She couldn't risk losing steady income for a temporary position, no matter how well it paid. Monday morning arrived with a mix of excitement and terror. Jessie dressed carefully in her one professional outfit, packed a bag with reference materials, and kissed Tyler goodbye with a promise. "Things are going to get better for us, buddy, I promise." "I know, Mom," he said with absolute certainty. "You're going to be amazing." As she entered Sinclair Enterprises as an employee, rather than a cleaner, Jessie felt like an imposter. The security guard issued her a temporary ID badge, and Linda met her in the lobby, explaining the schedule for the day. "The executive team meets at 10 to prepare for the conference call with Shanghai at 11. You'll be introduced then." Linda handed her a stack of documents. "Familiarize yourself with these terms. The executives can be demanding." That was an understatement. As Jessie discovered when she entered the conference room filled with men in expensive suits, they could also be dismissive, condescending, and completely oblivious. "This is our temporary interpreter, Jessica Parker," Linda announced. Most of the executives barely glanced at her. One, however, frowned deeply. Mr. Reynolds, whose Mandarin book was currently sitting on Jessie's nightstand. Her stomach dropped. Would he recognize her from her night cleaning shifts? "Where's Lawrence?" one executive demanded, referring to their regular interpreter. "Family emergency," Linda explained. "Miss Parker is filling in." "Is she qualified?" another asked, not bothering to address Jessie directly. Before Linda could respond, Jessie straightened her shoulders. "I am fluent in Mandarin and familiar with business terminology. I'm prepared to assist with the Shanghai negotiations." The room fell silent as they finally looked at her. Really looked at her. Mr. Reynolds narrowed his eyes, studying her face as if trying to place her. The tension was broken when the door opened and a deep voice said, "Sorry I'm late." Every head turned as Alexander Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Enterprises, walked into the room. At 42, he was younger than most CEOs of companies this size, having taken over when his father retired 5 years ago. His reputation preceded him. Brilliant, demanding, cold as ice, and completely focused on the bottom line. Tall with dark hair graying slightly at the temples, he commanded the room with his presence alone. His piercing blue eyes scanned the gathered executives before landing on Jessie. "Who's this?" he asked, his voice betraying no emotion. "Temporary interpreter, sir," Linda explained. "Jessica Parker." Alexander Sinclair studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Well, Miss Parker, I hope you're ready. These negotiations are worth hundreds of millions to this company." Jessie met his gaze steadily. "I understand, Mr. Sinclair. I'm ready." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her directness. He nodded once before turning to the room at large. "Let's begin." As the meeting progressed, Jessie took careful notes, preparing for the upcoming call. The executives discussed strategy, competitive advantages, and potential pitfalls. She followed most of it, though some technical terms sent her frantically searching through reference materials. At 10:55, everyone moved to the main boardroom where a large screen was set up for the video conference. Jessie's heart pounded as she took her position near Alexander Sinclair, who would be leading the negotiations. This was it, her moment to prove herself, or fail spectacularly. The call connected, revealing 4 serious-looking Chinese executives. After formal introductions, the negotiations began in earnest. For the next hour, Jessie translated back and forth, stumbling occasionally but recovering quickly. Whenever she hesitated on a term, she could feel Alexander Sinclair's intense gaze on her, but she refused to be intimidated. By the end of the call, a preliminary agreement had been reached. As the screen went dark, the room erupted in satisfied murmurs. Jessie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Not bad, Ms. Parker," one of the executives said with mild surprise. Alexander Sinclair remained silent, gathering his papers. As everyone filed out, he finally spoke. "A word, Miss Parker." Jessie's stomach tightened. Had she made some critical error? She followed him to his office, a massive corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. "Sit," he gestured to a chair in front of his desk. "Your Mandarin is interesting." "Sir, your accent is unusual, not textbook, but effective. The Shanghai team seemed to appreciate it." Was that a compliment? Jessie couldn't tell from his impassive expression. "Thank you, I think." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" "I taught myself," she admitted. "My mother was half Chinese, but she never taught me the language. After she passed, I wanted to connect with that part of my heritage." "Self-taught," he repeated, studying her with new interest. "Impressive." Jessie shifted, uncomfortably under his scrutiny. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, as if he could see past her carefully constructed facade to the exhausted single mother beneath. "The team was pleased with today's outcome," he continued. "You'll continue with. As for the duration of these negotiations, Linda will give you the schedule. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Sinclair." He nodded, already turning his attention to his computer, dismissing her without another word. As Jessie left his office, her phone vibrated with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Tyler has fever. School called. Picked him up." Panic surged through her. Tyler rarely got sick, but when he did, it hit him hard. She needed to get home, but she couldn't risk losing this job on her first day. As she stood in the hallway, torn between her son and her opportunity, she didn't notice the bathroom door opening until it was too late. She collided hard with someone exiting, nearly falling backwards. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. She looked up into the surprised face of Alexander Sinclair. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking where—" "Clearly," he cut her off, releasing her arms and stepping back. "Is everything all right? You look distressed." Should she lie? No, she decided. She wouldn't start this opportunity with dishonesty. "My son is sick. His school called." Something changed in Alexander's expression, a softening around the eyes, so brief she might have imagined it. "Go," he said simply. "Sir? We don't need you again until tomorrow morning. Go take care of your son." Relief washed over her. "Thank you. I'll be prepared for tomorrow's meetings, I promise." As she hurried toward the elevator, Jessie felt Alexander Sinclair's eyes following her. What she didn't see was the way his gaze lingered on her long after the elevator doors closed, or the thoughtful expression that replaced his usual mask of indifference. For Jessie Parker, this was just the beginning of opportunity, of change, and of a connection that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the man whose company she had cleaned in the shadows for years. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind for Jessie. During the day, she navigated the complex terrain of high-stakes business negotiations, translating between Sinclair Enterprises and their Shanghai partners. At night, she still donned her cleaner's uniform twice a week, mopping the same floors. She walked confidently across during business hours. The irony wasn't lost on her. No one at Sinclair recognized her as part of the invisible army that kept their offices pristine. She was careful to work different floors on her cleaning shifts, avoiding the executive level where she might be spotted. Tyler had recovered quickly. From his fever and with her interpreter salary, Jessie had finally been able to pay for a proper babysitter. Mrs. Rodriguez still helped, but now Jessie could afford a college student to pick Tyler up from school and stay with him until she got home. "Mom, can we get a dog now?" Tyler asked one evening as they ate dinner, a proper meal she'd cooked instead of the cheap takeout that had been their staple. "Not yet, buddy," she smiled, ruffling his hair, "but maybe soon if things keep going well." And things were going well, professionally at least. The Shanghai negotiations were progressing, and Jessie's role had expanded beyond mere translation. She'd started offering cultural insights that the executives found valuable, earning grudging respect from most of the team. Most, but not all. Harold Reynolds, the marketing VP whose Mandarin book she'd borrowed, watched her with thinly veiled suspicion. Several times she'd caught him studying her face as if trying to place her. She'd managed to return the book during a lunch break when his office was empty, but the close call had left her nerves frayed. Then there was Alexander Sinclair. The CEO remained an enigma, distant yet observant, cold yet occasionally showing flashes of unexpected consideration. Since that first day when he'd sent her home to Tyler, their interactions had been strictly professional, but she often felt his eyes on her during meetings, assessing and evaluating. On Friday morning, Jessie arrived early to prepare for a critical negotiation session. The Shanghai team had raised concerns about intellectual property protections, and the Sinclair team needed to address them carefully. She was reviewing technical terms in an empty conference room when the door opened. "You're here early, Ms. Parker." Alexander Sinclair stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway light. As always, he was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Good morning, Mr. Sinclair." She straightened in her chair. "I wanted to review the IP terminology before the call." He nodded, closing the door behind him. Instead of leaving, he sat across from her, setting down a leather portfolio. "Your work has been impressive," he said after a moment, his deep voice measured and controlled. "The Shanghai team specifically mentioned your skill in navigating cultural nuances." Coming from him, this was high praise. "Thank you, sir. Where did you work before this?" The question was casual, but his intense blue eyes were anything but. Jessie hesitated. "I've worked various jobs, mostly service industry." With no formal interpreter training, he noted, not a question but a statement. "Yet you're outperforming people with decades of experience and advanced degrees." She shifted uncomfortably. Was he suspicious, investigating her background? "I'm a quick learner," she said simply. Clearly, he studied her with that penetrating gaze that made her feel transparent. "The question is, what else have you learned, Ms. Parker? You seem remarkably well versed in our business operations for someone who joined us less than a month ago." Her heart stuttered. Did he somehow know about her cleaning job? About how she'd absorbed information night after night while the offices were empty? Before she could formulate a response, the door opened and several executives filed in for the morning briefing. Alexander held her gaze for one more long moment before turning his attention to the others. Throughout the meeting, Jessie struggled to focus, Alexander's questions echoing in her mind. When the Shanghai call finally ended successfully, 2 hours later, she breathed a sigh of relief. She needed space to think, to plan her next move if her cover was about to be blown. "Ms. Parker," Harold Reynolds called as she gathered her materials. "A word." Her stomach tightened as she followed him to a quiet corner of the room. "I've been trying to place you for weeks," he said, his voice low, "and I finally remembered where I've seen you before." This was it, the moment her two worlds collided. "You're with the cleaning crew, aren't you?" He didn't wait for her answer. "I've seen you emptying trash late at night. Did you think no one would notice, that you could just infiltrate our company like this?" "I didn't infiltrate anything," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I applied for an open position and was hired based on my skills." "Skills," he scoffed. "Is that what you call it? Lurking around after hours, probably stealing company information." "I never stole anything, except his Mandarin book, which she'd returned, but that was different. We'll see about that." The board should know what kind of person they've let into these negotiations. As he turned to walk away, Jessie felt her hard-won opportunity slipping through her fingers. Everything she'd sacrificed, all the late nights studying while Tyler slept, all of it would be for nothing if Reynolds exposed her. "Mr. Reynolds," she called, making him pause. "Before you do anything, ask yourself this. If I've been cleaning these offices for 3 years without anyone noticing me, what does that say about how this company treats people it considers beneath notice?" He stared at her, momentarily speechless. "And if I learned enough just from being invisible to qualify for this position, perhaps the problem isn't that I was a cleaner, but that no one bothered to see that I could be more." Before he could respond, Linda from HR approached them. "Jessie, Mr. Sinclair would like to see you in his office." Reynolds gave her a smug look. "Seems your reckoning is here sooner than expected." Jessie's legs felt leaden as she walked to Alexander's office. Had Reynolds already spoken to him? Was this the end of her brief rise from invisibility? Alexander was standing at the window when she entered, his back to the door, silhouetted against the bright midday sun. He turned as she closed the door behind her. "Miss Parker." His face revealed nothing. "Please sit." She perched on the edge of a chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've just had a very interesting conversation with the head of our janitorial services," he said, watching her closely. Jessie's breath caught. "This was it," he confirmed. "That you've been working as part of our night cleaning crew for the past 3 years." She lifted her chin, refusing to show shame. "Yes, I have. While raising a child as a single parent and working another day job." "Yes." Alexander sat on the edge of his desk, closer to her now. "And during those 3 years, you taught yourself Mandarin, absorbed complex business concepts and developed skills that our highest-paid consultants struggle to master." His tone wasn't accusatory, but curious, impressed. Jessie couldn't quite read him. "I've always been a fast learner," she said simply, "and I needed to find a way to provide a better life for my son." Alexander was silent for a long moment, studying her with those intense blue eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Why didn't you disclose this when you applied? Would you have hired me if I had?" The question hung between them, honest and challenging. To her surprise, Alexander's lips curved in a slight smile. "Probably not," he admitted. "Our hiring processes are traditional." "Exactly. I needed you to see what I could do, not where I came from." He nodded slowly. "And you've certainly proven your capabilities." He paused. "Reynolds wants you terminated." Her heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. "I understand." "I disagree with him." Jessie's eyes widened. "You do?" "I find your initiative remarkable. The Shanghai team respects you, and we're closer to finalizing this deal than we would have been with our regular interpreter." Hope flickered within her. "So you're not firing me?" "No." He moved back behind his desk, creating distance between them again. "But I am reassigning you." "Reassigning me? To where?" "To our international business development team. The position comes with a substantial salary increase and full benefits, assuming you're interested." Jessie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You're offering me a permanent position?" "Yes." He handed her a folder. "Your employment. Contract should you choose to accept. I suggest you review it carefully before deciding." She opened the folder with trembling hands. The salary listed made her inhale sharply. It was more than 5 times what she made as a cleaner. "Why?" she asked, looking up at him. "Why would you do this for me?" Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a crack in his carefully maintained facade. "Because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted cleaning toilets at midnight." He hesitated, then added, "And because I respect what you've accomplished against significant odds." Their eyes locked, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. Recognition, understanding, a connection neither had anticipated. Alexander broke the contact first, clearing his throat and straightening papers on his desk. "You'll need to give notice to the cleaning company, of course. and you should know that not everyone will welcome this transition, Reynolds in particular." "I can handle Reynolds," Jessie said with newfound confidence. "I believe you can," Alexander replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You'll report to Diane Chen in business development starting Monday." As Jessie left his office, clutching the contract that would change her life, she felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time since Tyler was born, she could see a clear path forward, one that didn't involve exhaustion and constant struggle. That weekend, she celebrated with Tyler, taking him to the Science Museum and out for ice cream. Small luxuries that had been beyond their means before. "Does this mean we can get a dog now?" Tyler asked, chocolate ice cream smeared across his grin. Jessie laughed, wiping his face with a napkin. "Let's give it a few months, buddy, but I think things are going to be different for us now." Monday morning arrived with new challenges. Dressed in a new outfit she'd splurged on, a charcoal grey suit that actually fit properly, Jessie stepped off the elevator on the 28th floor where the business development team was located. The reactions to her arrival ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Word had spread about her unusual path to Sinclair Enterprises, and the whispers followed her through the office. Diane Chen, her new boss, was a formidable woman in her 50s who had broken through multiple glass ceilings in her career. She greeted Jessie with a firm handshake and a direct gaze. "Sinclair himself vouched for you," she said without preamble. "That's rare. Don't make him regret it." "I won't," Jessie promised. "Good, because this department doesn't tolerate mediocrity, no matter how interesting your backstory is." The work was challenging, the learning curve steep. Jessie was tasked with researching potential international partners, analyzing market trends, and developing entry strategies for emerging markets. Her self-taught knowledge was put to the test daily, and she often stayed late to catch up on concepts her colleagues had learned in business school. Through it all, Alexander Sinclair remained distant. Their paths crossed occasionally in meetings or hallways, but he treated her with the same cool professionalism he showed everyone. If not for the opportunity he'd given her, Jessie might have thought she'd imagined that moment of connection in his office. 3 weeks into her new role, Jessie was working late, poring over market analyses for a potential partnership. In Singapore, most of the office had emptied hours ago, but she was determined to master this material before tomorrow's presentation. "Still here, Ms. Parker?" She looked up, startled to find Alexander standing in the doorway of the small conference room she'd commandeered. "Mr. Sinclair, yes, just preparing for tomorrow's Singapore briefing." He nodded, stepping into the room. "How are you finding your new position?" "Challenging," she admitted, "but in the best way. Diane has high standards." "As she should." He hesitated, then sat across from her. "The board is impressed with your insights on the Shanghai deal. The terms you helped negotiate saved us millions. I'm glad I could help." An awkward silence fell between them, thick with unspoken questions. Alexander seemed uncharacteristically uncertain, running a hand through his dark hair in a rare show of vulnerability. "Your son," he said finally. "How is he adjusting to your new schedule?" The personal question surprised her. "Tyler's doing well. He's happy I'm home earlier most nights, and I can afford a better after-school program for him now." Alexander nodded, a faraway look in his eyes. Children are resilient, but they need stability. Something in his tone made Jessie curious. "Do you have children, Mr. Sinclair?" "No." His answer was clipped, final. Then more softly, "My own childhood was not something I've been eager to replicate." The admission, small as it was, felt significant coming from a man who revealed so little of himself. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression closing off again. "I should go. Don't stay too late, Ms. Parker." As he rose to leave, he paused at the door. "There's a company reception next Friday. Board members, major investors, key executives. Your presence would be appropriate, given your contribution to the Shanghai deal." Was he inviting her? Ordering her? Jessie couldn't quite tell. "I'll be there," she said simply. He nodded once and was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of his expensive cologne and a lingering sense of confusion. The week passed in a blur of preparation and work. Jessie's Singapore presentation went well, earning her grudging respect from more of her colleagues. Even Reynolds had moved from open hostility to cold tolerance, though his eyes still followed her with suspicion. On Friday evening, she stood in front of her apartment mirror, surveying her reflection critically. The black cocktail dress she'd found on sale was simple but elegant. She'd splurged on proper shoes and had her hair styled, small luxuries that felt significant after years of making do. "You look like a princess, Mom," Tyler said from her bedroom doorway, eyes wide with admiration. Jessie laughed, kneeling, to hug him. "Hardly a princess, buddy, just trying to look professional." "Is your boss going to be there? The one you talk about?" She hesitated. "Mr. Sinclair? Yes, he'll be there." "Is he nice to you?" "An interesting question. He gave me this opportunity, so yes, I suppose he is." The babysitter arrived, and with a last kiss to Tyler's forehead, Jessie headed out, more nervous than she'd been for any business meeting. The reception was held at an exclusive downtown hotel, the ballroom transformed with elegant lighting and floral arrangements. Jessie took a deep breath before entering, reminding herself that she belonged here, that she had earned her place through intelligence and determination. Diane Chen spotted her immediately, waving her over to a group of executives. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the Singapore opportunity." For the next hour, Jessie circulated, engaging in conversations about markets and strategies, silently grateful for all the knowledge she'd absorbed during her years of invisibility. If anyone was surprised by her presence, they hid it well, except for Reynolds, whose sour expression followed her around the room like an unwelcome shadow. It was nearly 9 when she finally spotted Alexander. Unlike the other executives who congregated in boisterous groups, he stood somewhat apart, engaged in conversation with an older man Jessie recognized as Walter Sinclair, Alexander's father and the company's former CEO. Even from across the room, the tension between them was palpable. Walter's face was flushed with what appeared to be anger, while Alexander maintained the same impassive mask he wore in the office. Their conversation ended abruptly when Walter noticed Jessie watching them. He said something to Alexander, who turned to follow his father's gaze. When Alexander's eyes met hers, something shifted in his expression, a softening, a relief almost, as if the sight of her provided an escape from the conversation he'd been trapped in. He excused himself from his father and made his way toward her. "Ms. Parker," he greeted her, his voice warmer than she'd ever heard it. "I'm glad you could make it." "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, suddenly very aware of how close he was standing. "You look—" He hesitated, seeming to search for an appropriate word. "Different. Outside the office," she smiled. "Is that a polite way of saying I clean up well?" To her surprise, a genuine smile crossed his face, the first she'd ever seen from him. "It is indeed a transformation, though not an unwelcome one." Before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A woman had arrived, tall, blonde, strikingly beautiful, in an ice blue gown that likely cost more than Jessie's entire wardrobe. "Excuse me," Alexander said, his smile fading. "I need to handle this." As he walked away, Diane appeared at Jessie's side. "That's Vanessa Harrington," she explained, noting Jessie's curious gaze. "Daughter of James Harrington from the board. Her family owns nearly 10% of Sinclair Enterprises. And she and Mr. Sinclair are—" "Complicated," Diane replied with a knowing look. "Their families have been pushing them together for years, a merger of dynasties, so to speak." Jessie watched as Alexander greeted Vanessa with a cordial kiss on the cheek. They made a striking couple, both beautiful, wealthy, clearly belonging to the same world. A world that would never include Jessie Parker, former cleaning lady. "Don't waste your time," Diane advised, misreading Jessie's expression. "Men like Alexander Sinclair don't stray from their predetermined paths. Trust me, I've worked with his kind for 30 years. The evening took a downturn from there. Jessie found herself increasingly aware of the gulf between herself and everyone else in the room. These people had attended the best schools, vacationed in places she couldn't pronounce, and moved through life with the easy confidence of those who had never worried about paying rent. By 10:30, she was ready to leave. She made her excuses to Diane and headed for the coat check, eager to get home to Tyler and the simple reality of their small apartment. As she waited for her coat, a voice behind her made her freeze. "Leaving so soon, Miss Parker?" She turned, to find Alexander standing there, his tie loosened slightly, giving him a more approachable appearance. "Yes, I should get back to my son." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course." He paused, seeming to debate something internally before adding, "Would you like a ride? My driver is waiting outside." The offer surprised her. "Thank you, but I can manage." "I insist," he said with a gentle firmness that brooked no argument. "It's late, and Boston cabs can be unreliable on Friday nights." Before she could protest further, he had her coat in hand, holding it open for her. The unexpected chivalry flustered her, and she found herself accepting his offer with a small nod. Outside, a sleek black car idled at the curb. Alexander opened the door for her before sliding in beside her. As the car pulled away from the hotel, silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken awareness. "You seem to be enjoying yourself at the reception," he finally said, though his tone suggested he knew better. Jessie considered lying, then decided against it. "Actually, I felt rather out of place." "Because of your background?" "Partly," she admitted, "but mostly because everyone there seemed to be playing roles they've rehearsed their entire lives. The ambitious executive, the charming socialite, the powerful patriarch." She paused. "Even you." Alexander turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "What role do you think I'm playing, Ms. Parker?" "The perfect son, the dutiful heir." She met his gaze directly. "The man who sacrifices his own desires for family expectations." Her boldness shocked even herself. Perhaps it was the champagne, or the surreal intimacy of sitting beside him in the darkened car, but she had crossed a line she hadn't intended to approach. To her surprise, Alexander didn't seem offended. Instead, a flash of something like pain crossed his features before he looked away. "You're very observant," he said quietly, "a skill that has served you well, it seems." The car slowed as they entered Jessie's neighborhood, a stark contrast to the opulent downtown they'd left behind. She felt suddenly self-conscious about her modest apartment building. "This is fine," she said as they approached the corner. "You can drop me here." "Nonsense. We'll take you to your door." When the car stopped in front of her building, Alexander surprised her by exiting first and offering his hand to help her out. The gesture was so unexpected, so at odds with the calculating businessman she knew, that she accepted without thinking. "Thank you for the ride," she said, suddenly awkward under the yellow glow of the street lamp. "It was my pleasure." He hesitated, then added, "You were right, you know." "About what?" "The roles we play." His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Some of us have been playing them for so long, we've forgotten there might be alternatives." Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of mutual recognition, of seeing past carefully constructed facades to the truths beneath. The spell was broken by her phone buzzing with a text from the babysitter. Alexander stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Good night, Ms. Parker," he said formally. "I'll see you on Monday." As Jessie watched his car pull away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed tonight, not just in how Alexander Sinclair saw her, but in how she saw him. The weeks following the reception brought subtle but significant changes to Jessie's relationship with Alexander. In meetings, his eyes would seek hers across the conference table, a silent request for her opinion. When they passed in hallways, his usual curt nod was replaced with a genuine, if small, smile. It was as if their conversation in the car had cracked open a door between their worlds. Not enough to step through, but enough to glimpse what lay on the other side. For Jessie, these changes were both thrilling and terrifying. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, while helping Tyler with homework, during her morning commute, as she lay awake at night reviewing the day's events. She told herself it was natural to be drawn to someone who had changed her life so dramatically. Gratitude, that's all it was. But deep down, she knew it was more, and that knowledge scared her. One Wednesday afternoon, Jessie was presenting her analysis of potential markets in Southeast Asia when Reynolds interrupted her sharply. "These projections are overly optimistic," he said with barely concealed disdain. "Someone with formal training would understand the inherent risks better." The barb was aimed directly at her background, a reminder to everyone present that she hadn't earned her position through traditional channels. Before she could respond, Alexander's voice cut through the tension. "I find Ms. Parker's assessment to be thorough and well-reasoned," he said coolly. "Perhaps if you had concerns, Reynolds, you should have raised them before the meeting rather than attempting to undermine a colleague publicly." The room fell silent. Alexander Sinclair rarely engaged in office politics, and his defense of Jessie was unexpected. Reynolds' face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Of course, sir," he muttered, avoiding Jessie's eyes for the remainder of the meeting. Afterward, Alexander caught up with her in the hallway. "Don't let Reynolds get to you," he said, falling into step beside her. "He's threatened by your rapid advancement." "Thank you for stepping in, but I can fight my own battles," Jessie replied, feeling both grateful and slightly uncomfortable. With his protection. Alexander studied her face. "I have no doubt about that, but sometimes even the strongest fighters need allies." They had reached the elevator, and as other employees gathered to wait, their conversation lapsed into professional small talk. But as Jessie stepped into the crowded elevator, Alexander held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary, sending an inexplicable warmth through her chest. That evening, as she was preparing dinner, Tyler looked up from his homework with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, are you happier now at your new job?" She paused, spatula in hand. "Yes, I think I am. Why do you ask?" "You smile more," he said simply, "and you don't look so tired all the time." Jessie's heart swelled with love for her perceptive son. "You're right. Things are better now." "Is it because of your boss? The one who gave you the fancy job?" She nearly dropped the spatula. "Mr. Sinclair, what makes you ask that?" Tyler shrugged. "You talk about him a lot, and your voice gets different when you do." "Does it?" she asked, wondering if her feelings were that transparent. "Uh-huh. Like how Mrs. Rodriguez sounds when she talks about her late husband." Jessie turned back to the stove, grateful he couldn't see her flushed cheeks. "Well, Mr. Sinclair has been very supportive of my work. It's normal to appreciate a good boss. If you say so," Tyler replied, unconvinced. Then, with the guileless directness of children, he added, "You should invite him for dinner sometime. I want to meet him." The idea was so absurd. Alexander Sinclair sitting at their small kitchen table, eating spaghetti off their mismatched plates, that Jessie laughed out loud. "I don't think that's going to happen, buddy. Mr. Sinclair is very busy and important." "So are you," Tyler said loyally, "and you still make time for dinner." His innocent faith in her equal standing with someone like Alexander was both touching and heartbreaking. The truth was, despite Alexander's recent warmth, they existed in fundamentally different worlds, a fact that became painfully clear the following day. Jessie was working late, finalizing reports for a morning meeting, when she decided to grab coffee from the break room. As she approached, she heard voices from inside, Alexander's and a woman's. She was about to turn away when she heard her own name. "Parker woman is becoming a problem," the female voice said sharply. "The board is talking, Alexander. People are questioning your judgment." "My judgment is not the board's concern," Alexander replied coldly. "Jessie Parker has proven herself valuable to this company." "Oh, it's Jessie now, is it?" The woman's tone was mocking. "Don't think I haven't noticed how you look at her. Your little cleaning lady turned executive." Jessie recognized the voice. "Tao, Vanessa Harrington from the reception." "That's enough, Vanessa," Alexander warned. "No, it's not nearly enough," Vanessa snapped. "Your father is furious. The Harrington-Sinclair merger has been planned for years, our families, our companies." "I never agreed to any merger," Alexander cut in. "Personal or professional. Don't be naive. You don't have a choice. Neither of us does." Vanessa's voice softened slightly. "We make sense together, Alexander. We always have. This infatuation with your charity project. Don't call her that. Alexander's tone had an edge Jessie had never heard before. Jessie Parker has more intelligence and integrity than most of the Ivy-educated executives in this building. The silence that followed was charged with tension. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was dangerously calm. You need to decide what matters more, Alexander. Your family legacy or some fantasy about a woman who will never belong in our world, because you can't have both. Jessie backed away silently, her heart pounding. She returned to her office, gathered her things, and left without finishing her work. All night, Vanessa's words echoed in her mind. She will never belong in our world. The worst part was, Jessie knew it was true. The next morning, she arrived early, determined to focus on work and push aside the uncomfortable eavesdropping from the previous night. But as she stepped off the elevator, Linda from HR was waiting for her. Jessie, Mr. Sinclair would like to see you in his office immediately. Her stomach dropped. Had someone seen her near the break room? Did Alexander know she'd overheard his conversation with Vanessa? When she entered his office, Alexander was standing at the window, just as he had been that day weeks ago when he'd confronted her about her cleaning job. He turned when she entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch. A vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Close the door, please," he said quietly. She complied, heart racing. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes." He gestured for her to sit, then surprised her by taking the chair beside her rather than retreating behind his desk. "Jessie, I need to discuss something with you. Something important." The use of her first name wasn't lost on her. "Is everything all right?" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "There's been talk about you, about us." "Us?" she echoed, heat rising to her cheeks. "The board has concerns about my interest in your career." He chose his words carefully. "They think I've shown you favoritism." "Have you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Alexander met her eyes directly. "Yes," he admitted, "but not for the reasons they think. Not because I pity you or because I'm trying to make some point about corporate diversity." "Then why?" He leaned forward slightly. "Because in all my years running this company, I've never met anyone like you, someone who sees past the roles we play, who challenges me to be better, to question what I've always accepted as inevitable." Jessie's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. "Alexander, Next week," he interrupted, "there's an international business conference in New York. I'd like you to attend with me, as my representative." The abrupt shift in topic threw her. "Your representative?" "The official reason would be for you to gain exposure to international partners. It would benefit your position in business development." He paused. "Unofficially, I'd like the chance to talk with you away from this building, away from the politics and expectations." Understanding dawned. "You want us to spend time together?" "Yes." The single word held a weight of meaning. "If you're willing." Jessie's mind raced. Was he suggesting what she thought he was? And if so, what did that mean for her career, for the reputation she'd worked so hard to build? "I need to think about this," she said carefully. Alexander nodded, respecting her caution. "Of course, the conference is next Friday. You have until Tuesday to decide." As she left his office, Jessie felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Whatever she decided, nothing would be the same after this. The weekend passed in a blur of confusion. Jessie took Tyler to the park, helped him with a science project, went through the motions of normal life while her thoughts remained fixed on Alexander's invitation and what it might mean. On Monday morning, she arrived at work to find the office in an uproar. Whispers followed her down the hallway and Diane Chen intercepted her before she could reach her desk. "Have you seen it?" Diane demanded, holding out her tablet. "Seen what?" Diane showed her the screen, a business news site with the headline, "Sinclair Enterprises Rocked by Scandal, CEO's Affair with Former Cleaner Exposed." The article beneath contained intimate details about Jessie's background, her rise through the company, and insinuations about how she had really earned her position. There were quotes from anonymous sources, claiming Alexander had been infatuated with her since discovering her cleaning the executive floors. Jessie felt the blood drain from her face. This isn't true. We haven't... It doesn't matter what's... True, Diane said grimly. What matters is the perception. The board is in emergency session right now. As if on cue, Jessie's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Mr. Sinclair's office now. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like a journey to the gallows. When she arrived, Alexander's assistant waved her straight in, her expression carefully neutral. Inside, Alexander was pacing like a caged animal. He stopped when he saw her, his face a mask of controlled rage and something else, concern. "Jessie," he said, the formality between them completely abandoned now. "I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this." "Reynolds," she guessed. Most likely, though he covered his tracks well. Alexander's jaw tightened. "The board is demanding action. They want you to fire me," she stated flatly. "Yes." He moved closer to her. "But I won't. I refuse to let them dictate my decisions or punish you for their misplaced moral outrage." His defiance warmed her heart, but Jessie was nothing if not practical. "What's the alternative? The article is out there. People will talk regardless of what we do now." Alexander took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about this all morning. There are two paths forward." He held her gaze steadily. "First option, you transfer to our Seattle office. New environment, fresh start, away from the gossip. I would arrange everything, ensure you have a senior position with growth potential." The thought of leaving Boston, of Tyler changing schools, of starting over yet again was exhausting. But more than that, the thought of not seeing Alexander every day left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. "And the second option?" His expression softened. "We stop hiding. Stop pretending there isn't something between us. Something real." Jessie's breath caught. "Alexander, we can't just..." "Why not?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Because of what people will say. They're already saying it. Because of our different backgrounds. That's precisely why we understand each other. We've both been trapped by circumstance and expectations. Your father, the board, have controlled my life for too long." He reached for her hand, his touch sending electricity up her arm. "Jessie, meeting you. It woke something in me I thought was long dead. The courage to question the path. I've been following blindly." The intensity in his eyes was overwhelming. Jessie pulled her hand away, needing space to think clearly. "This isn't just about us," she said quietly. "I have Tyler to consider, his stability, his future, and your company can survive without me as CEO if necessary." The statement shocked her into silence. Alexander Sinclair willing to walk away from the empire he'd been groomed his entire life to lead? Because of her? "You can't mean that," she whispered. "I've never meant anything more." He moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. "For 42 years I've lived the life planned for me by others. Harvard Business School because my father went there, taking over the company because it was expected, nearly marrying Vanessa because our families decided it decades ago." He turned back to her. "For the first time, I want to choose my own path, and I want you beside me on it." The declaration hung in the air between them, breathtaking in its simplicity and its enormity. Before Jessie could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. "The board wants to see us both now." The boardroom was thick with tension when they entered. Walter Sinclair sat at the head of the table, his face thunderous. Beside him was Harold Reynolds, barely concealing his satisfaction. "Alexander, Miss Parker," Walter's voice was cold. "Please sit." They took seats across from each other, the long mahogany table a gulf between them. "I'll get straight to the point," Walter continued. "This morning's article has created a significant problem for Sinclair Enterprises. Our stock has already dropped 3 points. "A temporary reaction," Alexander replied calmly. "Perhaps, but the damage to our reputation could be lasting." Walter fixed his son with a hard stare. The board has reached a decision. Ms. Parker's employment will be terminated, effective immediately. Jessie's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression, neutral, refusing to show weakness. "That is not your decision to make," Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet. As CEO, you have demonstrated a serious lack of judgment," Walter cut in, "which is why the board has also voted to request your temporary step back while we assess the situation." The room fell silent. Jessie watched Alexander's face, seeing the muscle in his jaw twitch, the only outward sign of his fury. "I see," he said finally. "And if I refuse?" "Don't be difficult, Alexander," Walter sighed. "This is for the good of the company. Your grandfather built this legacy, and I will not allow it to be tarnished by a scandal." Alexander was silent for a long moment, his eyes meeting Jessie's across the table. In that look, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his features. "Well, Father, that makes my decision much easier." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket in a deliberate gesture. "I resign as CEO of Sinclair Enterprises, effective immediately." Gasps echoed around the table. Walter half rose from his chair. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious." Alexander's voice was calm, almost relieved. "For years I've led this company according to your vision, not mine. I've set aside my own happiness to meet your expectations. No more." He turned to Jessie. "Some things are more important than legacy or wealth or power." The boardroom exploded into chaos, voices shouting over each other, demands, threats. Through it all, Alexander remained steady, his eyes never leaving Jessie's face. When the noise became unbearable, he simply walked out, leaving stunned silence in his wake. After a moment's hesitation, Jessie followed him. In the hallway, he was waiting for her, his expression both exhilarated and terrified, the look of a man who had just jumped without knowing if his parachute would open. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did." He took her hands in his. "For once in my life, I needed to make a choice based on what I want, not what others expect." "And what do you want, Alexander?" His answer was to pull her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want a chance to see where this leads," he whispered. "Without the complications of boss and employee, without the shadow of scandal or gossip. People will talk anyway," she pointed out. "Let them." He smiled. "We know the truth." 2 months later, Jessie stood in the kitchen of a brownstone in Cambridge, watching as Tyler excitedly showed Alexander his science fair project, a working model of the solar system that they had built together over the past weekends. So much had changed. Alexander had indeed resigned from Sinclair Enterprises, though he remained a major shareholder. Instead of taking over another corporate giant as many had expected, he had surprised everyone by starting a foundation focused on educational opportunities for underprivileged communities. Jessie had joined him as Director of International Outreach, using her language skills and determination to build partnerships across the globe. Their relationship had blossomed away from the corporate politics and expectations. Alexander had revealed himself to be thoughtful, passionate, and surprisingly playful once freed from the constraints of his former life. He and Tyler had formed an immediate bond, united by their love of science and baseball. They were taking things slowly, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than the whirlwind romance the tabloids had invented. Tonight was the first time Alexander was staying for dinner, a milestone that Tyler had been anticipating all week. "And this," Tyler was saying, pointing to a small blue marble in his model, "is Earth. It's actually tiny compared to Jupiter. See? It's incredible," Alexander replied, his admiration genuine. "You're going to win that science fair for sure." "Mum helped with the wiring," Tyler admitted. "She's good at fixing things." "Your mum is good at many things," Alexander agreed, catching Jessie's eye across the room. The look they shared was full of promise and possibility. Later, after Tyler had gone to bed, they sat together on the small balcony, looking out at the Boston skyline glittering in the distance. "Any regrets?" Jesse asked, thinking of the empire he had walked away from. Alexander considered the question seriously, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About leaving Sinclair? No, the company will survive without me. My father is already grooming my cousin to take over." "And your father? Has he come around?" "He's starting to," Alexander said with a slight smile. "Seeing me happy is confusing for him. He doesn't quite understand it, but he respects it more than I expected." "And Vanessa?" "Already engaged to a shipping magnate from Greenwich." He chuckled. "I think she's relieved, honestly. We would have made each other miserable." Jesse leaned into his embrace, marveling at the strange, unpredictable path that had led her here. From cleaning toilets in the middle of the night to finding love with a man who had once seemed as distant as the stars. "What about you?" Alexander asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "Any regrets about how things unfolded?" She thought about Tyler's improved school, about the work she was doing that actually made a difference in people's lives, about the way Alexander looked, at her as if she were the most fascinating person he'd ever met. "Just one," she said seriously. "What's that?" She grinned up at him. "That I didn't walk into the wrong bathroom sooner." His laughter was warm against her hair as he pulled her closer. In that moment, Jesse knew that some risks were worth taking, some boundaries worth crossing. The woman who had once been invisible had finally been seen, not just by Alexander, but by herself. And the view from here was more beautiful than she could have imagined. Epilogue and call to action. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn morning, Jesse stood at the podium in front of a crowd of eager young faces. The Parker Sinclair Foundation's first educational center had officially opened in Dorchester, just blocks from where she and Tyler had once lived in their small apartment. The center offered after-school programs, career training, and language, classes for adults, all free of charge. The cleaning staff was paid a living wage with benefits, and several had already transitioned to administrative roles through the Foundation's advancement program. "Many of you know my story," Jesse said, looking out at the community gathered before her. "How I went from cleaning offices at midnight to running an international foundation. But what you might not know is that none of it would have happened if someone hadn't taken the time to truly see me." From the front row, Alexander watched, her with pride shining in his eyes. Beside him, Tyler beamed, sporting a junior science mentor badge for his role in the center's STEM program. "Every one of us has potential that goes beyond our current circumstances," Jesse continued. "Sometimes all we need is the opportunity to show what we're capable of. That's what this center represents, opportunity. Not charity, not handouts, but the chance to build something better through your own determination and hard work." Esme. She finished her speech to enthusiastic applause. Jesse caught Alexander's eye. The diamond ring on her left hand caught the sunlight as she waved, a recent addition that Tyler had helped Alexander select. Later that evening, as they walked through Boston Common, hand in hand, Jesse reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," she admitted. "All of this coming from a chance encounter in a bathroom." Alexander laughed. "I don't think it was chance at all. I think some people are meant to find each other, no matter how unlikely the circumstances." As Tyler ran ahead to feed the ducks, Alexander pulled Jesse close. "You know what I love most about our story?" he asked. "What's that?" "That it's still being written," he said, kissing her softly as the Boston skyline gleamed behind them, a reminder of where they'd been and a beacon for where they were going, together. Fimda Historia. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Jesse and Alexander has touched your hearts. Their journey from different worlds to finding love shows us that sometimes the most beautiful connections happen when we least expect them. For more emotionally engaging stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist you can find by clicking the link to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected love and personal growth, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life and relationships. What did you think about Jesse and Alexander's journey? Would you have made the same choices they did? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for our next story coming tomorrow. It might just be the emotional journey you've been waiting for.